The classroom smelled of chalk dust and stale air, heavy with the echoes of laughter that had long since faded. The clock on the wall ticked with ruthless precision, every second slicing deeper into Nathaniel Cross's chest. He stared down at the paper on his desk, red ink screaming across it like blood spatter. Another F. Not even close. The numbers didn't add up, the words didn't make sense. Just failure carved across the page, mocking him with every jagged line. He pressed his palms flat against the desk, the wood rough beneath his skin, as if grounding himself would stop the storm brewing inside. His fists itched to slam against the table, to crumple the test until it was nothing but ash. But he couldn't. He wouldn't. Because no matter what he did, the outcome was always the same: failure. He felt it in the pit of his stomach, a gnawing emptiness that no amount of money, privilege, or empty reassurances could ever fill. The hallways outside were alive just moments ago, feet thundering, voices rising in bursts of mockery. He could still hear them in his head. Rich boy can't even spell his own name. Bet daddy buys his grades, except look, he still fails. Their laughter chased him like shadows. His classmates had already fled to brighter corners of their lives, but their cruel echoes clung to Nathaniel, sticky and inescapable. He shut his eyes. For a moment, silence pressed against his ears. But even that wasn't relief. Silence wasn't peace, it was suffocating. It left him alone with the only voice he hated more than theirs, his own. Pathetic. Weak. Worthless. He had told himself those words so many times they weren't insults anymore. They were facts. Cold, hard, undeniable. And then came the sound. Soft. Faint. Almost unnoticeable at first. The scrape of a mop head dragging across the floor. Nathaniel's head snapped up, eyes narrowing against the dim light. At the far end of the room, moving like a shadow, was Marcia Grant. She pushed her mop with practiced patience, the swish of water against tile the only rhythm in the room. She was always there, at the edges of his failures, in the corners no one paid attention to. The cleaner. The invisible woman who lived in the blind spots of their world. Most students didn't even know her name. Some had never even looked at her face. They walked past her like she was furniture, like the mop she carried was more real than she was. But now, alone in the hollow room, Nathaniel couldn't look away. She didn't glance at him, not at first. Her focus was on the floor, on the circles she drew in water that reflected the fading light. But there was something in her posture, steady, unhurried, unbroken, that pressed against his chest harder than any insult could. And then, without warning, she looked up. Her eyes met his. They weren't sharp, or pitying, or dismissive like the others. They were steady, dark, unreadable. The kind of eyes that seemed to see straight through him, peeling back the walls he'd built and touching the raw nerve beneath. He tried to look away, but he couldn't. For one unbearable moment, Nathaniel felt as though she knew. She knew the weight pressing on his chest, the shame burning in his gut, the silent screams he'd never let anyone hear. He shifted in his seat, suddenly restless, suddenly exposed. Marcia blinked slowly, then lowered her gaze again. She pushed the mop forward, the water swishing quietly, as though nothing had happened. As though she hadn't just torn through him with a single glance. But Nathaniel knew. Something in that fleeting exchange left a mark he couldn't shake. Why did it feel like she saw more of him in that one glance than his teachers had in years? Why did it feel like she was waiting for him, as if she already knew where his story was going, and she wasn't going to let him walk it alone? The air felt heavier now, thick with a question he couldn't name. He sat there, his test paper glaring up at him. But for the first time it wasn't the red ink that consumed him. It was her, the cleaner, the invisible woman, the one everyone ignored. Except maybe she wasn't invisible after all. Hello my beautiful family and friends, dear friends. Welcome back to the channel. Before I carry you deeper into this story, let me pause and ask, How are you doing today? Really, I want to know. Drop it in the comments, and let me know where you're tuning in from. It always amazes me how many of you join from every corner of the world. And if you haven't yet, go ahead and hit that subscribe button right now. Because what you're about to hear, it's not just a story. It's a journey through pain, through silence, and into something so unexpected you won't want to click away. Now, let's get back to Nathaniel and the woman no one saw until tonight. Nathaniel Cross left the classroom with his shoulders hunched, dragging his backpack behind him like it weighed more than he did. The red-stained paper was crumpled inside, though he swore he could still hear it whispering at him, "Failure. Failure. Failure." The hallway was nearly empty now, lockers slamming shut in the distance, voices fading. He moved quickly, head down, hoping not to catch anyone's eye. But even in their absence, he felt their judgment. The smirks, the sideways glances, the whispers that clung to him like smoke. At 17, Nathaniel should have felt invincible. He had everything other kids envied: expensive shoes, the latest phone, a last name that carried weight. But the truth was simple: he'd never felt smaller. When he pushed open the doors to the outside, the cool evening air hit his face. The world beyond the schoolyard buzzed with cars, with laughter spilling from a group of kids walking home together. Nathaniel paused, watching them for a moment. They bumped shoulders, traded jokes, their joy careless and unearned. He wanted to hate them. He wanted to believe they were shallow. But deep down, he ached for what they had: belonging. Ease. His driver was waiting at the curb, a black car gleaming under the streetlight. The man inside barely glanced up from his phone as Nathaniel slid into the back seat. The leather was cold, the silence colder. "Rough day?" the driver asked out of courtesy, eyes still fixed on the glowing screen. Nathaniel didn't answer. He knew the man didn't care. None of them did. As the car pulled away from the school, Nathaniel pressed his forehead against the window. The city lights blurred into streaks, as though the world was rushing past and he couldn't keep up. His chest tightened, his throat thick. He blinked hard, refusing to let the tears fall. Because if there was one thing his father had drilled into him, it was this: crying is weakness. And weakness is unacceptable. Home was a mansion on the edge of town, though Nathaniel never called it that. It wasn't home. It was a house, a hollow museum of success, wide halls echoing with emptiness, walls lined with paintings no one admired anymore. When he stepped inside, the air was heavy with silence. No mother humming in the kitchen. No laughter spilling from the living room. Only the faint hum of the refrigerator and the occasional tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway. His father was in his study, of course. Where else? Nathaniel could hear the low murmur of his voice on a call, firm, commanding, impatient. He didn't bother going in. He knew how that conversation would end. If his father looked up, his eyes would narrow, flicking to Nathaniel's slouched posture, the weariness in his face. There would be no questions about how his day was, no gentle encouragement. Only one demand: show me your grades. And when Nathaniel handed over the paper, another failure, his father's jaw would clench, and his voice would cut like a blade. "Do you even try? Do you realize how much you embarrass me? I didn't build everything we have for you to throw it away. You're pathetic, Nathaniel. A cross doesn't fail." He'd heard it so many times that he could recite it before his father even opened his mouth. Sometimes his father didn't even speak, just sighed, the sound heavy with disappointment, before turning back to his laptop. That sigh was worse than yelling. It told Nathaniel he wasn't even worth the effort of anger. So tonight, Nathaniel didn't even bother. He went straight upstairs, shutting his door behind him. His room was immaculate, not because he cared, but because someone else cleaned it for him. His desk was stacked with untouched textbooks, their glossy covers mocking him with their weight of expectation. A gaming console sat on the dresser, abandoned. Even escape felt pointless these days. He collapsed onto his bed, staring at the ceiling. His chest ached with that familiar heaviness, the gnawing belief that no matter what he did, it would never be enough. Not for his father, not for his teachers, not for anyone. And in that quiet, his thoughts turned, strangely stubbornly, to Marcia Grant. The cleaner. Why had her eyes lingered on him like that? Why had it felt like she understood something no one else could? He didn't know her story. He didn't know anything about her beyond the mop and the silence she carried. But for reasons he couldn't explain, she wouldn't leave his mind. Marcia Grant's life was nothing like Nathaniel's, though their pain ran parallel in ways neither of them yet realized. By day, she was invisible, a woman who swept hallways, emptied trash cans, and scrubbed floors that never stayed clean. She moved with practiced quietness, the kind that made her blend into the walls. Most students didn't know she was there, and those who did never saw past the uniform, the gloves, the mop. But when she went home at night, her silence broke. Her small apartment was worn but warm, lined with second-hand furniture and faded photographs. In the kitchen, a single framed picture sat on the counter, a boy with a crooked smile, his arms slung around her shoulder. Her son, gone now but never gone from her. She would sit at the table sometimes, the weight of the day pressing on her back, and run her fingers over that frame. She'd whisper words only the walls heard. Words of regret, of longing, of all the things she wished she could have said when she had the chance. Because Marcia carried her own secret, one Nathaniel couldn't know yet. She had once lost a boy who reminded her far too much of him. A boy crushed beneath the same silence, the same neglect, the same hunger to be seen. And though she didn't know it yet, fate had brought her into Nathaniel's orbit for a reason. Nathaniel didn't know why he noticed Marcia more and more in the days that followed. In the cafeteria, she pushed her cart along the floor, collecting trays and wiping tables. Students brushed past her, never looking down. But Nathaniel's eyes lingered. In the gym hallway, she gathered trash after practice, her movements slow but steady. She didn't flinch when basketballs thudded near her feet or when kids shouted past her. Nathaniel, dripping with sweat after another failed game, found his gaze locked on her, wondering what it would be like to carry yourself with such unshaken calm when the world treated you like you were nothing. Each time he caught himself. Why am I even noticing her? He thought. But he couldn't help it. There was something in her silence, in the way her eyes held no judgment, no pity, just knowing, that tugged at the frayed edges of his soul. And though he would never admit it, Nathaniel felt a dangerous thought creeping in. Maybe she saw him in ways no one else ever had. The rain had started just before dismissal, a steady drizzle soaking the sidewalks outside Roosevelt High School in Chicago's South Side. Students spilled out under umbrellas, their voices rising in bursts of laughter and complaints, backpacks bouncing as they hurried toward buses or parents waiting in cars along the curb. Nathaniel Cross stood beneath the overhang near the gym doors, hood pulled over his head. He clutched his books against his chest, not because he cared about them, but because it gave his trembling hands something to do. Another test returned. Another failure circled in red. His father's voice already echoed in his head. I didn't raise a fool. But what burned worse was the whisper he overheard as he passed the lockers earlier. Two boys leaning against the wall, smirking. Money can't buy brains, one of them said, loud enough for the whole hallway to hear. Yeah, he'll probably drop out and Daddy will just buy him a job, the other sneered. They laughed as if the joke wasn't just about him, as if it were fact. He hadn't stopped to argue. He hadn't even looked at them. He just kept walking, every step heavier than the last, the shame clinging like wet clothes. Now, standing under the overhang, Nathaniel wasn't sure he could face the car ride home. The driver would glance at him in the rearview mirror, maybe make some small talk, but it didn't matter. His father would see the grades eventually. And when he did, Nathaniel knew what was waiting, disappointment sharpened into anger. He needed to disappear. Just for a little while. So instead of heading toward the waiting black sedan, Nathaniel turned. He shoved his hands into his pockets and walked around the corner of the school, the rain soaking into his shoes. He didn't know where he was going, only that he couldn't go home. Not yet. The alley behind the school smelled of damp concrete and bleach. Trash bins lined the wall, and a single flickering light buzzed above the back door. That's where he saw her. Marcia Grant. She was hauling a trash bag into the bin, her shoulders tense against the weight. Her hair was damp from the drizzle, her uniform clinging to her arms. She moved without complaint, without hurry, as though she'd done this same motion 1,000 times before. For a moment, Nathaniel just stood there watching. He didn't mean to. He told himself he should keep walking. But something about the sight of her, steady in the rain, unbothered by the world's indifference, rooted him to the spot. And then, as if sensing him, Marcia looked up. Their eyes met. Nathaniel froze. The shame from the test, the whispers in the hallway, the weight of his father's voice, all of it collided with the quiet steadiness in her gaze. He felt exposed, as if she could see everything he was hiding. "You gonna stand there all night?" Marcia's voice broke through the drizzle, low and steady. Nathaniel's mouth went dry. He wanted to answer, but no words came. He shifted, shoving his hands deeper into his pockets. Marcia tilted her head slightly, studying him. Then she dropped the bag into the bin and wiped her hands on her apron. "You think you're the only one carrying heavy things?" she said quietly. The words hit him harder than the rain. "What?" Nathaniel finally managed. Marcia didn't repeat herself. She just turned back toward the door, pushing it open with her shoulder. But just before stepping inside, she glanced back at him, her eyes holding his for a beat longer than necessary. And then she was gone. That night, Nathaniel lay awake in his room, the city sounds drifting in through the window, distant sirens, the hum of traffic on the Dan Ryan Expressway, the occasional bark of a dog. He stared at the ceiling, Marcia's words circling in his mind. "You think you're the only one carrying heavy things?" No one had ever spoken to him like that. Not his teachers, not his classmates, not even his father. They either mocked him, pitted him, or ignored him. But Marcia, she had looked at him like she knew. Like she carried her own weight, and maybe, just maybe, his wasn't so different. He didn't know why, but he needed to understand what she meant. The next day, Nathaniel found himself lingering in the hall after school again. He told himself he was just killing time before his driver arrived, but deep down he knew better. He was waiting for her. Sure enough, Marcia appeared, pushing her mop bucket down the hallway. The squeak of the wheels echoed in the empty corridor. Nathaniel hesitated, then forced himself to step forward. "Hey," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Marcia paused, looking up at him. Her expression didn't change. She simply raised an eyebrow, waiting. "You said yesterday." Nathaniel's throat tightened. He swallowed hard. "What did you mean?" Marcia leaned on the mop handle, studying him. The silence stretched, and Nathaniel's palms began to sweat. Finally, she said, "It means you're not as alone as you think you are." The words sent a chill down his spine. He wanted to ask more. He wanted to know what she carried, what she meant. But before he could, the squeal of sneakers echoed down the hall. A group of boys rounded the corner, laughing, tossing a basketball between them. They spotted Nathaniel and smirked. "Look, it's Cross," one of them jeered. "What's the cleaner gonna do, teach you how to pass a test?" Laughter erupted. The ball bounced hard against the wall, rolling toward Marcia's feet. She bent, picked it up, and held it. For a moment, the hallway went quiet. The boys expected her to hand it back. Instead, she turned it in her hands, her gaze steady, then looked at Nathaniel. "You gonna let them write your story for you?" she asked. The boys laughed louder, but the words weren't for them. They were for him. Nathaniel's heart pounded. He wanted to answer. He wanted to shout no. But the truth was, he didn't know how. Marcia tossed the ball back, hard enough that the boy who caught it stumbled. Her eyes never left Nathaniel's. And in that moment, something shifted. You ever have someone say just a few words to you, and it changes everything? Like they reached straight into your chest and put language to what you couldn't explain? If you know what I mean, drop a comment with a simple yes. Because those moments, they stay with you. For Nathaniel, this was that moment. He didn't know it yet, but Marcia's words, those quiet challenges spoken in hallways no one noticed, were about to unravel everything he thought he knew about himself, his father, and the weight he carried. And that unraveling began with a single question echoing in his mind. You gonna let them write your story for you? The following week at Roosevelt High unfolded like a storm Nathaniel couldn't escape. Every class blurred into the next, teachers' voices droning, chalk scratching against the board, numbers and words swimming into nonsense. Each time a test was handed back, he braced himself, and each time it was the same. Red marks, circles, notes scrawled in margins. See me after class. Did you study at all? Hopeless effort. He didn't bother seeing them. What was the point? At home, his father's disappointment escalated. The study in the mansion had become a courtroom, and Nathaniel was always the guilty defendant. Another failure? His father snapped one evening, slamming the test paper onto the mahogany desk. Do you realize how humiliating this is? Your last name opens doors most people could only dream of, and you spit in its face with this nonsense. Nathaniel stood rigid, jaw clenched, staring at the floor. Answer me. I tried, Nathaniel muttered, his voice small. You tried? Don't insult me. Trying is for children. Results are what matter. A cross does not fail. Not at business. Not at life. Not at anything. The words sliced deeper than any red ink could. Nathaniel left the study with his ears burning, his chest hollow. Upstairs, he closed his door, pressed his back against it, and sank to the floor. It wasn't just that he failed. It was that his father made him believe he was failure. At school, the whispers followed him. In the cafeteria, he sat alone, his food untouched. The laughter at the next table cut sharper than knives. Bet his dad pays people to hang out with him. Imagine having everything and still being nothing. He shoved his tray away, appetite gone. And that's when he saw her. Marcia, pushing her cart, collecting trays. Her presence was quiet, unobtrusive, and yet Nathaniel felt her eyes flick toward him for just a second. Not pitying, not judging, just noticing. It was enough to make him sit up straighter, even if only for a moment. One Thursday afternoon, as rain streaked down the windows of his history class, Nathaniel's teacher, Mr. Halvorson, leaned against the desk, arms crossed. Nathaniel, he said after handing back another test. We need to talk. The classroom was nearly empty, most students rushing off to beat the rain. Nathaniel shoved the paper into his bag, not wanting to see the grade. You're not stupid, Mr. Halvorson said. His voice was firm, but not unkind. But you act like you've already lost before you even try. Why is that? Nathaniel didn't answer. I can't keep passing you if this continues, Halvorson added. You need help. Tutors, extra sessions, something. Because right now you're sabotaging yourself. The word sabotaging echoed in Nathaniel's ears as he walked out. But the truth was, he didn't need his teacher to tell him. He already felt it in his bones. That evening, instead of heading straight to the car, Nathaniel wandered to a small coffee shop near the school, South Loop Brews. He'd passed it 100 times but never gone inside. The smell of espresso and baked goods hit him as he pushed open the door. The warmth was a relief after the cold rain outside. He ordered nothing, just sat in the corner, staring at the rain-soaked street. A few minutes later, the bell above the door jingled, and Marcia walked in. Still in her work uniform, hair damp, carrying a tote bag. She ordered a black coffee and sat at a small table by the window. Nathaniel's stomach tightened. He thought about leaving. but something kept him there. When she glanced his way, her brow lifted slightly. "Running from the rain too?" she asked, voice calm. He hesitated, then nodded. She gestured toward the empty seat across from her. "Sit, or stand there looking lost. Your choice." Reluctantly, he slid into the chair. The warmth of the shop, the hum of conversation around them, the hiss of milk frothers, it all felt strangely safe. "You don't usually come here," Marcia observed. Nathaniel shook his head. Needed space. From what? The question landed heavy. He fumbled for an answer. School. People. He swallowed. "My dad." Marcia studied him over the rim of her cup. "He's hard on you." Nathaniel almost laughed, but it came out bitter. "Hard? No. Hard is pushing someone because you believe in them. He doesn't push. He crushes. Like nothing I do will ever be enough." Marcia set her cup down, her eyes never leaving his. "And you believe him?" Nathaniel's throat tightened. He wanted to deny it, to claim otherwise. But her words sliced too close to the truth. "Why do you care?" he asked, voice rough. Marcia leaned back, gaze steady. "Because I've seen boys like you before. Strong on the outside, breaking on the inside. And I know where that road ends if no one steps in." Nathaniel's chest constricted. He wanted to ask her what she meant. He wanted to demand details. But before he could, her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, frowned, and stood. "Take care of yourself, Nathaniel," she said, gathering her bag. And just like that, she was gone, leaving him staring at the steam rising from her half-empty cup. Have you ever met someone who said just enough to make you realize how heavy your silence really was? If you felt that, it's impossible to go back to pretending you're fine. The days that followed were heavier. Nathaniel's father's anger grew sharper, the whispers at school more ruthless. Yet, in the background, Marcia's words echoed louder than all of it. "I've seen boys like you before. And I know where that road ends." Nathaniel didn't understand yet. But he knew one thing. He wasn't ready to let her words fade. And soon he wouldn't have the choice. Because Marcia's secret, the truth she carried like a shadow, was about to unravel into his life, changing everything. Rain bled along State Street in thin silver threads, turning the pavement into a mirror that kept giving Nathaniel Cross back to himself. He drifted past the Harold Washington Library like a ghost, shoulders hunched inside his hoodie, the city's breath warm and damp against his face. Buses sighed, tires hissed, and the L shuddered overhead along the elevated tracks on Wabash, a metal heart beating out of rhythm with his own. He didn't notice Marcia Grant until she said his name. "Nathaniel." She stood beneath a street lamp near the library's corner on Van Buren, tote bags slung over one shoulder, uniform still damp from a long shift. Her gaze had that steady weight again, the kind that didn't try to fix him or pity him, or pretend he wasn't unraveling right there on the sidewalk. Chicago moved around them like a living organism. Sirens in the distance, a vendor rattling the lid of a cart, the river of people parting without ever seeing them. "You shouldn't be out here alone," she said, voice low. He hugged his books tighter. "I'm fine." "You're not," she answered, not unkindly. He swallowed. "Why do you care?" Marcia watched him the way you watch a door you know will open if you wait long enough. "Because I know this wait," she said. "And I know where it leads." He tried to laugh, but it broke in his throat. "You don't know me." She nodded once, as if agreeing. "Walk with me." They crossed to the library together and climbed the broad steps slick with rain. Inside, the air shifted, paper, polish, and the soft murmur of voices rising up the atrium like a prayer. Nathaniel hadn't been in here since a class trip in middle school. He remembered thinking the building felt like a cathedral for people who didn't believe anymore, and kept coming anyway because silence was cheaper than hope. They rode the elevator in quiet. On the 9th floor, the winter garden opened in a wash of pale light. Glass ceiling, fig trees and planters, tables dotted with people hunched over notes and laptops. A security guard nodded at Marcia, like he'd seen her here before, and looked away. They sat at the edge beneath a skylight freckled with rain. Nathaniel braced his elbows on the table, hands clenched. He didn't know why being up this high made him feel smaller. "What happened?" she asked. "Same as always," he said. "Test. Red ink. Dad's voice in my head. The usual." "What's the worst part?" she asked, not letting him hide inside the summary. "The look," he answered before he could stop himself. "My father doesn't even need words. He just looks, like he's measuring the distance between what I am and what I should have been." Marcia nodded slowly. "And what do you do with that look?" He shrugged. "Fail again." "Why?" "Because it's what I do." "That's not an answer," she said gently. "That's a verdict." He stared at the fine cracks in the tabletop, a hairline lightning bolt running toward his knuckles. He wanted to tell her he was tired, that he felt like a door no key could open, that he woke each morning already behind. Instead, he said nothing and hoped silence would do the talking for him. Marcia set her toad on the table, unzipped it, and pulled out a small, bent photograph in a cheap frame. She didn't push it toward him. She placed it between them the way you set down a candle in a dark room. "My son," she said. Nathaniel looked because you look when someone offers you the one thing they protect most. A boy smiled back at him, broad grin, shoulders tilting into a laugh, a little chipped tooth on the left. The picture looked like summer, a baseball diamond somewhere near 63rd and Stony Island maybe, a chain-link fence throwing shadows across his jersey. "His name was Jalen," Marcia said. "He liked the White Sox, even when they were losing. Said he respected a team that could keep showing up." Nathaniel waited. He heard the L groan again across the city, like it was remembering something it didn't want to. "Jalen's father." Marcia's eyes grazed the skylight. "Left early. He came back sometimes. Only long enough to count what wasn't enough. Rent late. My fault. Grades low. Jalen's fault. Any joy we had, he measured against what we didn't. And Jalen, he learned to measure himself the same way." She didn't cry. She didn't have to. The way she held that frame made the tears unnecessary. "He was good at math," she said, and a smile flickered. Numbers sang to him. He'd sit at the kitchen table and show me how two negatives can make a positive. He liked that. The way wrongs could cancel each other out. Nathaniel's throat tightened. "What happened?" Marcia kept her gaze on the boy in the photograph. "The looking happened," she said softly. "The measuring. The kind your father does. The kind that takes the breath out of a house one sigh at a time." She folded her hands. "Jalen started missing homework. I picked up extra shifts. He started missing sleep. I fell asleep on the bus. He started missing himself." She paused then. "One night, after a day full of nothing but looks and silence, he walked out. Said he was going to clear his head. I made a pot of coffee and waited. I kept the TV low so I'd hear the door. I told myself boys need air, and strong boys come back." Her voice fell to a thread. He didn't. The winter garden hummed around them, pages turning, shoes whispering across tile, while the center of Nathaniel's chest opened like a trapdoor. He didn't ask the polite questions. He didn't say he was sorry. He didn't reach for words built for greeting cards, because the ones he needed didn't exist. "I buried my son at 17, Marcia said. "And I've been looking for him ever since. Not to bring him back. Just to keep him from arriving in anyone else." Silence shook between them. Nathaniel felt his fingernails bite his palm. He thought of the red ink, the breath he held each time a teacher flipped a test to his desk. The way his father's shoes sounded in the hallway, firm, efficient, like a metronome for a life he'd never live. He thought of the boys in the corridor tossing a basketball past Marcia like she was furniture. He thought of how his name felt in other people's mouths. Cross, like a thing to be carried until it broke you. "I'm not him," Nathaniel managed, voice raw. "I'm not Jalen." "No," Marcia said, and the syllable cradled him. You're Nathaniel, and your story hasn't been told yet. But you're walking a road I know by heart. Roads don't care who you are, baby. They take whoever steps on them. Then how do I get off it? You stop walking the way they tell you, she said simply. And you start telling the truth. He laughed once, humorless. To who? Yourself, she said. And then your father. Because the truth is a place, Nathaniel. Not a sentence. You stand there long enough, and people have to come to you. He looked away because the skylight was too much like heaven, and his eyes were tired. On the far side of the garden, a custodian wheeled a cart past, humming under his breath. Two students argued softly over a citation format. Someone in the corner wiped their eyes with the heel of a hand and kept reading anyway. The city swelled through the glass like a tide. You said you've been looking for him, Nathaniel said after a while. How do you look for someone who's gone? Marcia's fingers traced the edge of the frame. You listen for echoes, she answered. You keep your pockets full of words you should have said, and you hand them out wherever you hear the same silence. And you stand between boys and the looks that tell them they're already finished. He watched her tuck the photograph back into her tote as if returning breath to a pair of lungs. When she looked at him again, her eyes were not sad. They were stubborn. Why me? He asked, and he hated how small it sounded. Because when you sat alone in that classroom with your fists clenched, you looked exactly like a life that still wants to live. He flinched, a soft, involuntary motion, as if she'd pressed a palm against a bruise he hadn't admitted to. He heard the careless laughter of his classmates at Roosevelt High, the hiss of the espresso machine at South Loop Brews, the hard thump of a basketball in the hall. He heard the old man's sighs that lived inside his father's mouth. What if I can't change? He whispered. What if there's nothing in me to change into? Marcia leaned in, elbows on the table, voice a shade above the hush around them. Let me show you something. They left the library together, the elevator's soft bell returning them to the ground floor, the city's damp heat pressing close again. They walked west on Van Buren, turned south on State, then east on Roosevelt toward Wabash, where White Palace Grill glowed like a stubborn memory in the rain. Inside, breakfast sugar and coffee drifted through the air, the clink of plates stitching together strangers who didn't want to go home yet. They slid into a booth. I can't buy you much, Marcia said, glancing at the laminated menu. But you sit, you eat some fries, you tell me what your own voice sounds like. Not your father's. Not your classmates. Yours. If you don't know, we'll wait until it shows up. How long does that take? He asked, attempting a joke and failing. As long as it takes, she said, and flagged the server. They shared a plate of fries that steamed like a small weather system. Nathaniel watched the ketchup bloom. He tried to find words and kept finding weather reports, cloudy with a chance of nothing. Marcia ate one fry, then another, like she was teaching him the ordinary can hold you up. When the silence stretched into a rope, she tugged it gently. What's the first time you remember feeling small? He stared at the bottle of hot sauce on the table. 2nd grade. We had to read out loud. I tripped over a word I'd said right in my head. Everyone laughed. The teacher said, "It's okay, Nathaniel, just sound it out," and did that little shoulder pat that says you're a lost cause in a cute package. What word? Ordinary, he said, surprised he knew. Isn't that funny? Nothing about it is funny, she said. It's a word built like a fence, and once you sat on top of it, people didn't let you down. So you stayed there. He swallowed. In 4th grade, my dad came to career day. Brought a slideshow. Everyone clapped. Afterward, he said, "You'll do this someday. I'll make sure you do it right." I didn't sleep for 3 nights. What did you feel in your body when he said it? My hands got cold, he said immediately. I couldn't get warm. It's like that when I bring him tests. Like my blood goes quiet. Marcia nodded. Bodies don't lie. Learn yours. He thought of how the red ink lifted like a rash across the page. He thought of the way his heart sprinted when a teacher paused at his desk. He thought of how laughter can sound like applause if you want to hate yourself efficiently. Marcia sipped water and let him remember. Outside, a bus wheezed. Inside, a toddler in the next booth banged a spoon and grinned. "My mother left when I was 9, he said, the sentence falling out like a coin he hadn't meant to spend. It wasn't dramatic. She just stopped coming home. He told me she needed time to think. I learned what time to think means." He waited for pity. Marcia gave him attention instead. "What did you learn?" she asked. "That leaving is quiet," he said. "And that staying can be quieter." She held his gaze. "And what did your body learn?" "That whenever the door opens, someone is measuring whether I'm worth walking back through it." He pressed his palms flat to the table, breathing like the air had weighed again. "Okay," Marcia said softly. "So here's what we do with that." She reached into her tote and pulled out a small spiral notebook and a pen. She set them on the table and nudged them toward him. "You write," she said. "Not essays. Not homework. Not anything anyone grades. You write sentences your body believes. 1 per day. Something like, 'I am allowed to ask for help.' Or, 'A look can't tell my whole story.' You write it and carry it. When your hands go cold, you touch it. If you forget, you write it again." He stared at the notebook like she'd slid a match across the table. "And when I have to face him?" His voice dropped. "When he says I embarrass him. When he does the look." "You stand in the place the sentence built," she answered. "And you tell him one truth he can't grade." He tried to imagine it. The study at home, the smell of old wood and coffee, the framed certificates. His father's eyes narrowing. His mouth making room for the words he always sharpened. He tried to see himself not shrinking. He failed at that too and flinched. "What if I can't?" he asked. "Then you fail differently," she said. "On purpose. At something worth failing at. You tell him what you need and shake. You cry and keep going. You try and let yourself be seen trying. That's the only way you learn the truth has a spine." A server slid the check onto the table. Marcia tucked a few bills under the saucer. When Nathaniel reached for his wallet, she shook her head. "You pay next time," she said like a contract. They stepped back into the night. The rain had thinned to a mist that made the streetlights bloom. The L rattled again, faithful as a bad habit. They walked up Wabash toward Jackson, where the red line swallowed people and spit them out elsewhere. "Come by the gym hallway after last period tomorrow," Marcia said as they paused near the station stairs. "You don't have to say anything. Just show up." "Why the gym hallway?" "Because that's where you hear the most careless laughter," she said. "We're going to make sure it doesn't belong to you." He nodded. He didn't know why he trusted her. Maybe because she carried grief the way you carry a lamp through a room you know too well, careful not to wake the ghosts. Maybe because she had said his name without asking anything from it. They stood for a moment longer, the city moving through them. Then she touched his sleeve, small, brief, like punctuation, and headed down the stairs. He watched until the back of her head disappeared into the tunnel. He waited until the metal sigh of a departing train told him the story was still moving. Nathaniel turned toward home. He didn't take the car. He walked. Past Grant Park, where the grass held the rain like 1,000 small mirrors. Past a couple arguing gently over a map under an awning. Past a man selling roses from a bucket who lifted one and smiled without pressure. He walked until his phone buzzed like a housefly in his pocket. "Father, where are you?" He typed and erased 4 times. He looked up at the skyline and tried to find a sentence his body believed. "Nathaniel, I'll be home soon." He slid the phone away, pulled the hoodie tighter, and kept walking. When he reached the house, the big, echoing proof of someone else's success, he stood at the study door and knocked once. "Come," his father said, already exasperated, as if the syllable itself were a waste. Nathaniel stepped in. The room smelled like paper and old coffee. The lamp threw a circle of light around a desk that looked like it had never been asked for anything it couldn't give. His father glanced up. Their eyes held. There it was, the measuring efficient as a blood test. Nathaniel felt his hands go cold. He pressed his thumb against the notebook in his hoodie pocket until he could feel the cardboard edge, until his pulse admitted it was still there. "What is it?" his father asked. Nathaniel began, and the words stalled. He tried again. "I'm getting help." He took the notebook out and placed it on the desk as if offering a very small animal. "It's not for grades. It's for me." His father's nostrils flared in that precise way that said, "This is not what I asked for." "From whom?" he said, making whom sound like a scalpel. "A woman at school," Nathaniel said, and watched his father's jaw set. "Her name is Marcia. She works," he stopped, hearing how quickly his father would turn that into a weapon. "She sees me." The silence after that sentence was not empty. It was crowded with looks and old sentences, and a boy learning to hold ground. His father leaned back. "A cleaner," he said flat. "That's your mentor? While you fail out of every class I pay for." Nathaniel's hands went colder. He pressed harder into the notebook's edge. "She lost her son," he said, and found he could say it without the word breaking. "She knows where this road goes. I'm getting off it." His father's laugh was soft and unkind. "You think you're on a road? You're on a leash." Nathaniel felt something stand up inside him, the truth spine Marcia promised. He took a breath through his nose and let it out slow, the way you do when you decide not to run. "I'm not asking you," he said, surprised at how even his voice was. "I'm telling you what I'm doing." His father's face shifted. Surprise first, then contempt, then a hardness that made the room smaller. "You'll do as I say," he replied. "You don't parade our name in front of the hired help like a pity project. You want to fix yourself? Do it with people whose lives look like the one you're supposed to live." Nathaniel remembered the fries, the rain on the skylight, the sound a photo frame makes when someone sets it down like a candle. He touched the notebook again. "I want to live," he said. "Not look like it." The sentence landed between them and didn't apologize. His father's mouth opened and closed. Once. Twice. He gestured toward the door. "Go to your room," he said finally, reverting to the only country where he ruled. Nathaniel left. He closed the door gently and leaned his forehead against it in the hall until the wood cooled his skin. Then he went to his room, slid the notebook under his pillow like a passport, and lay there listening to the house keep breathing without him. He didn't sleep much. When he did, he dreamed of a glass ceiling streaked with rain and a boy squinting into summer light at a diamond that could have been anywhere. In the dream, the boy turned, and for once Nathaniel didn't ask if he was Jalen. He asked, "Are you me?" The boy smiled like a secret and ran toward first base because running is what boys are made to do until someone tells them their legs belong to the look. In the morning, Chicago smelled like wet concrete and toast. Nathaniel dressed, tucked the notebook into his pocket, and headed for the bus instead of the car. On the way to Roosevelt High, he stood on the Jackson Red Line platform, reading a single sentence he'd written in blue ink just before dawn. "A look is not a law." He read it again when the train lights appeared in the tunnel. He read it again when the doors opened. He read it a third time when he stepped into the gym hallway after last period and the laughter started up, bright and careless as always. Marcia was already there, pushing her cart past the trophy case. She met his eyes like they'd made a plan in another life and were simply remembering which door to use. He felt his hands start to cool and put his palm over the notebook until they warmed. Then he took a breath, and for the first time in a long time, Nathaniel Cross did not wait to be measured before deciding who he was. He walked toward the sound. Quiet check-in for anyone listening. If this part of the story has you breathing a little slower, or you caught yourself remembering your sentence, the one your body still believes, share a word in the comments that you want to carry this week. Just one word. You'll be surprised how many of us need the same one. The days after Nathaniel first wrote in the notebook felt strange, like he was walking on a new street while the old one still pulled at his heels. For the first time, he had words in his pocket that weren't his father's. A look is not a law. He touched the notebook whenever his chest got tight, and sometimes, just for a moment, the weight eased. But hope, when it's new, is fragile. And fragile things break easily. Friday afternoon in biology class, Mr. Patel handed back the exams. Nathaniel's pulse jumped when he saw the red ink bleeding across the top corner. Another failure. Cross, Mr. Patel said, not cruelly but wearily. Stay after class. The bell rang. Students shuffled out, some with smirks, others too busy with weekend plans to care. Nathaniel stayed rooted to his seat, his heart pounding. Patel leaned against the desk. I've been teaching 20 years. I can tell the difference between a student who doesn't care and a student who's drowning. Which are you? Nathaniel swallowed. Does it matter? Yes, Patel said. Because I can help one of those. The other, he trailed off, shaking his head. Nathaniel looked down at the test. Red circles everywhere. His throat closed. You're smart enough, Patel said. But something in you has decided you're not. The words stabbed deeper than if he'd just said you failed. Nathaniel shoved the test into his bag, mumbling, I have to go. In the hallway, a group of boys leaned against the lockers, tossing a football. One of them snatched Nathaniel's test from his bag as he passed, holding it up. Look, another masterpiece from the genius, the boy laughed, reading the red mark aloud. 32%. That's not even half. The others roared. The paper fluttered back to the floor, trampled as they walked away. Nathaniel stooped to pick it up. His hands shook so badly he almost tore it. He pressed his palm against the notebook in his pocket, but this time the words didn't work. A look is not a law. Then why did the law feel so permanent? That evening, his father waited in the study. The paper lay on the desk. 32, his father said, voice like ice cracking. Do you enjoy humiliating me? Nathaniel's mouth went dry. Do you think my colleagues don't ask about you? How's Nathaniel, they say. What do you expect me to answer? That my son is a walking embarrassment? That despite every resource, every dollar, every opportunity, he can't pass a basic test? Nathaniel's chest burned. I'm trying. His father slammed his hand against the desk. The lamp rattled. Trying doesn't put your name on a diploma. Trying doesn't keep this family from being a laughingstock. You are my son. That means excellence. Or nothing. The notebook in Nathaniel's pocket felt like paper against stone. Weak. Small. His father leaned closer, eyes hard. You will stop wasting your time with that cleaner woman. Nathaniel's breath caught. How do you? I had you followed, his father snapped. You think I wouldn't find out? Meeting her in coffee shops? Sitting in diners like beggars? Do you know what it looks like? A cross taking advice from a janitor? Do you realize how pathetic that is? The words hit like blows. Nathaniel's nails dug into his palms until blood beaded. She lost her son, Nathaniel said quietly. She knows what it's like. His father sneered. She couldn't save her own. And you think she'll save you? That sentence split something in Nathaniel's chest. Get out, his father said. I don't want to see you until you can prove you're worthy of this family. Nathaniel turned. His legs barely carried him. Upstairs, he shut his door, pressed his back against it, and slid to the floor. The notebook slipped from his pocket. The words stared back. A look is not a law. But what about a voice? A father's voice? Didn't that sound like law? He pressed his forehead to his knees and shook. The next day, he found Marcia in the gym hallway, pushing her cart as usual. They know, Nathaniel said, voice raw. He knows. He said you're pathetic. That you couldn't even save your son. Marcia froze. The mop handle slipped from her fingers, clattering against the floor. For a moment, Nathaniel thought she might cry. But when she looked at him, her face was stone. Maybe he's right, she whispered. The words crushed him. What? I couldn't save Jalen, she said, her voice flat, stripped of its usual warmth. And if you think I can save you, you're mistaken. No one can save you but yourself. Her cart squeaked as she pushed it down the hall, leaving him standing there hollow. For the first time, Nathaniel felt abandoned by the only person who had ever seen him. That night, the city blurred past as Nathaniel wandered down Michigan Avenue. Neon lights smeared across wet pavement. Tourists bustled past, arms full of shopping bags from Water Tower Place. He felt like a ghost walking through a life that didn't belong to him. At the bridge over the Chicago River, he stopped. The water below churned, black and merciless. The voices filled his head. Failure. Pathetic. Embarrassment. His father's sneer. His classmates' laughter. Even Marcia's words. No one can save you but yourself. He gripped the railing, knuckles white. For a moment, the city fell away. It was just him and the black water, and the terrible quiet that promised escape. Tears blurred his vision. His chest heaved. He leaned forward. Nathaniel. The voice cut through the storm in his head. He turned. Marcia stood a few feet away, rain dripping from her hair, her chest rising and falling like she had run all the way there. Don't you dare, she said, her voice breaking. Don't you dare let their voices be the last ones you hear. Nathaniel's hands trembled on the railing. You said you couldn't save me. I can't, Marcia cried. But I can stand here until you save yourself. The words ripped him open. His knees buckled. He collapsed against the railing, sobs tearing through him, raw and unstoppable. Marcia crossed the distance and pulled him into her arms. She held him as the rain poured, as the city moved around them, as the river roared below. For the first time, Nathaniel didn't hide the broken sound of his grief. And for the first time, someone held on and didn't let go. Sometimes the darkest moment is the one where every voice tells you to give up. But if you've ever had someone, just one person, refuse to let go of you in that moment, then you know what Nathaniel felt on that bridge. And if you haven't, maybe this story is your reminder to be that person for someone else. Nathaniel didn't know it yet, but this was the night everything broke, and the night everything could finally begin again. The rain had eased into mist by the time Nathaniel staggered away from the Chicago River, Marcia's arms steadying him. His legs shook with every step, as though his body was relearning how to stand. They walked down Wacker Drive in silence, the city's hum wrapping around them. The rumble of buses, the splash of tires through puddles, voices drifting from restaurants where strangers laughed over meals. Nathaniel envied those voices, but for the first time in a long time, he didn't hate himself for it. When they reached a bench near Millennium Park, Marcia guided him to sit. The Cloud Gate, the Bean, loomed nearby, its mirrored surface scattering the city lights into 1,000 fractured versions of themselves. Nathaniel stared at his reflection, warped and endless, and for once he didn't flinch. Marcia sat beside him, her breath steady. You scared me tonight, she said softly. Nathaniel rubbed his hands together, ashamed. I scared myself. You almost let their voices win. He nodded. I thought, if I couldn't be what he wanted, maybe it'd be easier not to be anything. His throat tightened. But when you said you'd stand there until I saved myself, it made me realize something. No one has ever stood with me. Not once. Marcia's eyes glistened, but her voice was firm. I told you, Nathaniel. I can't save you. But I can walk beside you while you learn how. He looked at her, the weight of gratitude and fear pressing into his chest. What if I fall again? Then we get up again, she said simply. Falling isn't the end. Staying down is. The next week at Roosevelt High felt different, though nothing outside had changed. The same halls, the same sneers, the same red ink on his papers. But inside, something had shifted. Nathaniel carried the notebook everywhere. He wrote in it daily, sentences that felt awkward at first, then slowly became anchors. I am not invisible. Failure is not forever. A look is not a law. I am worth more than silence. He touched the notebook during class when his hands went cold. He read the words under his breath in the cafeteria when whispers hissed around him. He even pulled it out once, bold and unashamed, when a boy mocked his grade. The laughter faltered. It didn't stop, but it didn't own him the way it used to. One afternoon in English class, Mrs. Ramirez asked for volunteers to read a passage from Of Mice and Men. The old panic flared in Nathaniel's chest. He remembered second grade. He remembered the word ordinary. His classmates shifted in their seats, some already smirking in expectation. Nathaniel pressed his hand against the notebook in his pocket. A look is not a law. Slowly, he raised his hand. Mrs. Ramirez blinked in surprise, then nodded. Go ahead, Nathaniel. His voice trembled on the first sentence. A snicker rose from the back. His hands shook, but he kept going, word by word, line by line, and by the time he finished, the room was quiet. For the first time in his life, he had read aloud and not drowned. He sat down, heart racing, face flushed. He didn't look around to see who was watching. He didn't need to. That evening, Nathaniel found Marcia in the cafeteria, wiping down tables after the rush. He approached, the weight in his chest lighter than it had been in years. I did it, he said. Marcia glanced up. What? I read out loud in class. My voice shook, but I finished. I didn't quit. Her face softened into something between pride and relief. That's the first step, she said. Not letting the fear tell your story. Nathaniel hesitated. Why do you do this? For me. Marcia set down her rag, leaning against the table. Because someone once told me pain can either make you bitter or make you useful. I chose useful. If my scars can help you write a different ending than my son, then they weren't for nothing. Nathaniel's eyes burned. I don't deserve this. She shook her head. No one deserves grace. That's why it's powerful. The next Saturday, Marcia asked Nathaniel to meet her at Dusable Harbor. The lake stretched out like a vast sheet of glass, broken only by the masts of boats swaying gently. This city has broken a lot of people, she said as they walked along the water. But it's also healed some. You get to choose which story is yours. Nathaniel stared out at Lake Michigan, its horizon endless. For the first time, he believed he might have a future beyond failure. How? He asked. You face him, Marcia said quietly. Not with anger. Not with grades. With truth. Nathaniel's stomach nodded. He won't listen. Maybe not, Marcia admitted. But you need to hear yourself say it. That's where freedom begins. Sometimes the bravest thing isn't winning or proving them wrong. It's finally speaking your truth, even if they don't hear it. If you know what I mean, type truth in the comments. Because truth is the only road that can't be taken from you. As they stood by the harbor, the wind tugging at their clothes, Nathaniel felt something rise in him he hadn't felt in years. Not confidence exactly. Not strength. But possibility. And for the first time, he believed that maybe, just maybe, his story wasn't finished yet. The Sunday evening before midterms, the Cross Mansion was quieter than usual. No dinner in the dining room, no clink of silverware. Just the dim light spilling from the study where Nathaniel's father sat behind his desk, glasses perched on his nose, a glass of whiskey untouched at his elbow. Nathaniel stood in the doorway, notebook clutched in his hand. His stomach churned, his throat dry. But he remembered Marcia's words at Dusable Harbor. Freedom begins when you hear yourself say it. His father didn't look up. If you're here about your grades, spare me. Nathaniel stepped inside. His voice trembled, but he spoke anyway. I'm not here about grades. That made his father glance up, irritation flickering in his eyes. Then what? Nathaniel's fingers dug into the notebook. A look is not a law. I'm here about me, he said. His father leaned back, folding his arms. You. The word dripped contempt. What about you? I'm not who you want me to be, Nathaniel said, his voice cracking. I never was. And I'm done breaking myself to try. His father's face hardened. You think this is brave? Throwing a tantrum because life is hard? I built everything we have by refusing weakness. And you, he jabbed a finger toward him. You've done nothing but embarrass me. The words hit like blows, but Nathaniel pressed his palm against the notebook in his pocket. He opened it, found the sentence he'd written that morning. I am worth more than silence. I'm not an embarrassment, Nathaniel said, louder this time. I'm your son, and if you can't see that, then that's your failure, not mine. For a moment, silence filled the study. The only sound was the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. His father's jaw clenched. You dare? Yes, Nathaniel cut in, surprising himself. For once I dare. You think I'm nothing without your approval? You're wrong. I've been nothing with it. I'm done letting your voice be the only one I hear. His father's face reddened, his voice sharp as glass. Get out! But Nathaniel didn't move. For the first time, he didn't move. You're afraid, he said softly. Afraid that if I stop letting you define me, you'll lose control. But I'm already gone. I'd rather be nothing on my own terms than everything on yours. The words shook the air. His father's hand trembled where it rested on the desk. For the first time, Nathaniel saw something crack in his eyes. Not anger, not contempt, but fear. You sound like her, his father muttered, almost to himself. Nathaniel froze. Who? Your mother, he said bitterly. Always with her feelings. Always questioning. Look where that got her. The words twisted, but instead of breaking him, they clarified. Nathaniel realized something. His father wasn't strong. He was terrified. Terrified of feelings. Terrified of losing control. Terrified of being left. And Nathaniel refused to inherit that fear. He closed the notebook gently and slipped it back into his pocket. I'm done, he said, his voice calm. I won't stop trying to grow. But I'll do it my way. If that means I fail, then at least the failure will be mine. His father stared at him, face unreadable. If you walk out that door, don't expect me to bring you back. Nathaniel swallowed. The words cut, but they didn't kill. Then don't expect me to keep crawling for scraps of love you'll never give. The silence that followed was deafening. Finally, his father turned away, his voice cold. Go! Nathaniel turned. His legs shook, but each step grew steadier as he walked out of the study, out of the suffocating air, and into the wide hall. Upstairs, he shut his door. His chest heaved. Tears blurred his vision. But for the first time, they weren't just tears of pain. They were tears of release. The next day after school, Nathaniel found Marcia in the cafeteria, stacking chairs. I did it, he said, his voice rough. She looked up. What? I told him. Everything. I stood there. He told me to go, and I went. And I'm still here. Marcia's lips parted, her eyes shining. She set the chair down and came closer. How do you feel? He thought for a moment. Terrified, but also free. Marcia's hand squeezed his shoulder. That's the truth's price. But it's worth it. Nathaniel pulled out the notebook. I don't think I could have done it without this. Marcia smiled softly. That notebook isn't magic, baby. The words came from you. All I did was remind you to write them down. His throat tightened. Thank you. Her eyes glistened. Don't thank me. Live it. That's thanks enough. A week later, in English class, Mrs. Ramirez announced an oral presentation. Nathaniel's stomach flipped, but he pressed his palm against the notebook. When it was his turn, he stood, hands shaking, and began to speak. His voice faltered at first, then steadied. By the time he finished, the room was silent. No laughter, no whispers, just silence. And then applause. It wasn't thunderous. It wasn't dramatic. But it was real. Nathaniel sat down, chest heaving, heart racing. For the first time, he didn't just survive the moment. He owned it. If you've ever stood up, voice shaking, and said the thing you thought would break you, then you know what Nathaniel felt. And if you haven't yet, Maybe this is your sign that it's time. Not for them. For you. The tide had turned. Nathaniel wasn't finished. He wasn't fixed. But he was finally free enough to fight. And the world around him was about to change in ways he couldn't imagine. Spring arrived slowly in Chicago, the air still sharp, but the promise of warmth creeping in with every sunrise. The trees along Michigan Avenue began to soften with buds, and the lake glimmered with that peculiar blue that only shows up when winter finally starts loosening its grip. Nathaniel Cross walked down the front steps of Roosevelt High with the notebook tucked in his jacket pocket. It had grown fat now, its pages heavy with sentences that told the story of someone learning to breathe. He flipped through it sometimes just to see how far he'd come. I am not invisible. Failure is not forever. A look is not a law. I am worth more than silence. I choose my own road. Each line felt less like a wish and more like a memory of battles survived. That day, as the final bell echoed, Marcia was waiting near the entrance, her cart parked neatly against the wall. She gave him that quiet nod she always did, the one that somehow carried more pride than words ever could. "How was it?" she asked. "I passed," Nathaniel said, the corners of his mouth lifting. "Not perfect, but I passed." Marcia's eyes softened. "That's what victory looks like, messy, unfinished, but yours." He laughed quietly, the sound surprising even him. For so long, laughter had felt foreign, like it belonged to other people. Now it lived in him again, fragile but real. That weekend, Nathaniel invited Marcia to White Palace Grill. The same booth, the same sticky table where she'd first slid the notebook across to him. This time, he ordered for both of them, fries and coffee, her favorites. As they ate, Nathaniel slid the notebook across the table. "I want you to have this." Marcia frowned. "It's yours." "I'll start another one," he said. "But this is the one you gave me, even if my hand wrote the words. It belongs with you." Marcia's throat worked as she blinked hard. Slowly, she placed a hand over the notebook. "Then I'll keep it," she whispered. "And when I see another boy who thinks he's drowning, I'll show him your words. So you'll stand with him too." Nathaniel's chest tightened. "That's what you did for me. And what you'll do for someone else someday," she said firmly. "That's how we heal." Passing the words forward. Nathaniel still lived under the same roof, but the study no longer ruled him. His father remained distant, his approval withheld, his words sharp when they came. But Nathaniel no longer crumbled beneath them. One evening, his father glanced at him across the dining room table and said, "Your teachers say you're improving. Don't let it get to your head." Nathaniel swallowed a mouthful of water and nodded. "I won't." Inside, though, he smiled. Not because his father's words mattered, but because they didn't. For the first time, silence at the table wasn't a punishment. It was peace. On a rainy afternoon in May, Nathaniel found Marcia sitting alone in the winter garden of the Harold Washington Library, the photo of her son on the table before her. He sat down across from her without a word. After a while, Marcia spoke. "For years, I've asked myself what more I could have done for Jalen. What words I should have said. I'll never have that answer. But helping you," her voice broke, then steadied. "Helping you gave me something back I thought I lost forever." Nathaniel reached across the table, his hand covering hers. "You didn't fail him, Marcia. The world did. But you saved me. And that means he's still here, in a way." Tears slid down Marcia's cheeks, quiet but unstoppable. For the first time, she let herself cry in front of him. Nathaniel didn't look away. He held her hand tighter. In that moment, they weren't a cleaner and a student. They weren't broken pieces of separate stories. They were two souls carrying scars that, when pressed together, formed something whole. Graduation came with summer heat shimmering off the city streets. Nathaniel stood in his cap and gown, the fabric stiff, the air buzzing with the excitement of classmates and families gathered on the lawn outside the school. His father was there, arms crossed, expression unreadable. Marcia was there too, standing off to the side in her work uniform, a small smile on her face. When Nathaniel's name was called, he walked across the stage. The applause wasn't thunderous, but it was enough. He took the diploma, shook the principal's hand, and for once felt the paper in his hands mean more than red ink ever had. As he stepped down the stairs, his eyes found Marcia's. She nodded once, tears glimmering. Later, when the crowd dispersed, Nathaniel approached her. He pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket and handed it to her. "What's this?" she asked. "My last entry," he said. She opened it. In his uneven handwriting, the words read, "I am not my father's silence. I am not my classmates' laughter. I am not my failures. I am Nathaniel Cross, and I am still here." Marcia pressed the paper to her chest, her shoulders shaking. "You did it," she whispered. "No," Nathaniel said softly. "We did. And maybe that's the truth we all need to remember. That no matter how heavy the silence, no matter how cruel the voices, survival isn't about perfection. It's about standing back up. About choosing to write a new sentence when the old ones don't fit. So let me ask you, what sentence would you write today if you had a notebook in your pocket? Share it in the comments. Because you never know, your words might be the one someone else needs to hear to keep walking. And if this story touched you, stay with us, subscribe, share it with someone who might need hope tonight. Because stories aren't just told. They're lived. And together we write better ones.
Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed it, you will surely love the next one. It's as interesting and more intriguing than you can ever imagine.